welcome back to the Pit Stop Podcast. I am Jordan Eller Coltman, joined by Tyler Walzak. Tyler, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, Jeddah, it is the second fastest circuit, as you mentioned in our preview. And I think this might be our fastest podcast of the year because, honestly, I have so few things I want to talk about. And almost none of the things I want to talk about really had to do with the race. They're like the other things going on around this race. But yeah, it was definitely not as exciting or dramatic as maybe we had hoped for this circuit, because this circuit has in the past given us a lot more, safety cars and drama and excitement from that perspective. But it was pretty much, two guys to watch at the front, a couple of interesting storylines in the back, but for the most part, not too much to really get you overly excited for. Certainly coming out of what had been a couple weeks of pretty exciting races, or at least compelling races with some storylines built into them. But it does set us up for an interesting conversation about where we stand in the Drivers' Championship, and that's where I'd like to start. Oscar Piastri.
Okay, so you don't even want to get through you don't even want to talk about the race, so
no, I really don't care. We can get back to it. Yeah, we can get back to it and talk specifically about it. But can we just talk about the big picture for just a second to start here?
Okay.
Is that fair or no? I know I'm breaking the entire format of the show, but I just look, for me, here's the only thing that matters coming out of this. You and I both picked Lando Norris to win the championship. He is not doing anything right now to instill in me great confidence that was a smart decision, because he's letting Max beat him a couple weeks ago. Oscar looked like he was a completely different league to him all weekend long. And I think Oscar Piastri just looks so much more relaxed and calm. And I think Lando Norris has a bit of the yips.
I've said, I don't know if it's yips. He's just not as aggressive. He's more of a conservative driver. Like we talked about this, and I think even during the previews, I said like Norris will probably win because he won't have Max at the front fighting with him, so he'll be more confident going into corners with opponents. Did not know that it would be Max would be at the front, but Piastri does. Piastri has the ability and the mindset to go elbow to elbow in the corners. And going back to that's a great segue back into the race. But that first corner, we saw it. We saw Piastri do exactly what Max Verstappen did to Norris every single time they both went into a corner last year. And Norris always backed out and then complained, like, he didn't give me any room. He didn't give me any room. And he always gave the spot back. Max went into the corner, didn't have any room, didn't give the spot back after the first lap, and he got a 5-second penalty for it. So he got a taste of his own medicine. That is exact what Piastri did to Verstappen at the beginning of this race was exactly what Verstappen does to everybody else. So he got a taste of his own medicine, and it cost him the race. Yeah.
So do you want to talk more about that? That you've got, look at how
no. We can now go back to the driver's standings.
Very smooth. I'm going to ignore the conversation you want to have and just steer right back. That's like you just I'm on the outside and you just pushed me right off the track and said, my track now, we're going back to where I want to talk about. Look at you.
But I gave it back to you. Because Piastri, is in first. Norris is behind him in second by 10 points. And then Verstappen's 2 points behind Norris. So, I mean, those are going to be the three guys in this season. Those will be the three to watch.
I think so. I mean, the only wild card for me is there's this guy named George Russell who's hanging around, and if for some reason Mercedes can really turn that car on, the kind of like, if you remember last year, McLaren, who ends up winning the constructors championship, had a dreadful first 5 races. Like bad, even worse than Mercedes is having, and Mercedes is having a pretty good start. But if Mercedes can have the kind of mid-season improvements that McLaren did last year, look out for George Russell, because he's collecting points and he's staying in the conversation. But you're right, Oscar clinches his 3rd win of the season. It overtakes Max to become the first Australian since Mark Webber in 2010 to lead the F1 standings. And obviously that first move was his race because it set Max back with the 5-second penalty that kind of pushed it back, and obviously Max still tried to push at the end, but Piastri just had great pace the entire way. I'd also give McLaren some credit for some good tire management, because that was the only other kind of storyline that throughout this race is there was a lot of tire conversation in terms of how you were going to play it, but they did a very good job with that. And also we're seeing this kind of weird I don't know, like Red Bull. On I shouldn't really say Red Bull. It's Max Verstappen and McLaren. Kind of, there could be a really fun little rivalry the whole way here because they are two teams who clearly don't like each other, two team principals who clearly don't like each other, and now you got two V1 driver wise that don't like each other because, of course, no matter who they put in the Red Bull, they're nowhere near the top of the table. So
Yeah.
it's Max versus everybody at this point. But
Well,
McLaren's
it's Max.
performance
It's
and sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
it's Max versus everybody, but it's Max versus McLaren. The season
Yeah,
will be Max versus McLaren unless Ferrari can get it together. And I know you just said Russell and Mercedes, but um, I have a weird feeling that Mercedes is kind of peaked to what they can do with Russell in
maybe.
that car before McLaren starts getting upgrades because they're great at their first upgrades. Their first
Yeah,
upgrades of the last 3 seasons have been phenomenal.
yeah,
So once they get those, then I think maybe they take a hundredth of a second gap
yeah.
extension
No,
between
but
Mercedes and them.
to be fair, don't throw Ferrari away yet because Ferrari got their first podium of the season. Charles
Yes.
Leclerc had a very good race,
Yes.
finishing third. And obviously that late pit stop strategy that allowed him to overtake George Russell was kind of key to it, right? But I think Ferrari is still trying to figure it out, and they are definitely on the back foot. But I don't think that they're dead yet in this
No, and
conversation.
Hamilton still has to try to figure out how to drive that car and what's
Sure.
best suited for him to drive that car, which will eventually come around and he'll probably get a podium at some point in the next 5, 6 races, maybe 10. But they will sort of start to figure it out, especially with him there. But you're right, like it was very easy to record this Wednesday night because Monday night you had the Oilers first game, and it was like, you know what, just enjoy that because I messaged you being like, enjoy hockey because this race sucked.
Yeah,
It was very boring, other than the first lap, which I don't even want to talk about Tsunoda and Gasly. Tsunoda
that
took
was
out
brutal.
Gasly,
Yeah, that was
like
brutal.
just took him out, just bad driving.
Okay, so yes, I agree that I think Tsunoda is at fault for it, but I also wonder, like, that's one of those first couple corners of a race where, like, you've got a lot of people around you. It's a racing incident. I don't think he turned into him so much as he caught that back tire because there's not a lot of room there.
Right,
I
but
think Tsunoda could have been more cautious, but also, like, to be fair to Sonoda, you are in a position right now where like he's under a lot of pressure, so he's going to be aggressive, and he was obviously a little too aggressive there. But Gasly wasn't giving up anything either. Like they were fighting for the same bit of track, and sometimes on those first laps, honestly, I was surprised we didn't have more cars come together because this is one of those circuits is a very short like sprint to that first corner, and then it's very tight. So
yeah,
Piastri and Verstappen easily could have contacted wheels too if Max hadn't just bailed out into the runoff as quickly as he did. You know what I mean? So like it's
yeah,
a his first lap incident. I'll give him some benefit, but I do think you're right. I think Sonoda's at fault for that one for sure, which is frustrating.
yeah, for sure. He hit his front right or front left hit Gasly's back wheel and spun him
Yeah,
around, and they both went into the wall. And they tried to see if Tsunoda could keep going, but his rear was too
yeah, it
damaged
was too
for it. And
damaged.
I mean, that's Tsunoda's got to start getting worried
Well,
soon,
that's
right?
that's what I mean. It's not like he's come in and been gangbusters compared to what Lawson's finishes were. So
Yeah,
what are we talking about here, Ferrari or
exactly.
Red Bull?
Red Bull. And that's exactly the whole point of like what if I just don't understand why you'd switch drivers knowing that it's probably going to be the same exact results with Tsunoda. It's because it's the car. Everyone else in the world knows it's the car except for Red Bull because they're just blindly going, well, we have a driver over there that knows how to drive this car. Great. He is he's the 4-time champion, 3-time champion. What's our record or what are we at with him?
Well, three officially.
Whatever he has minus one, whatever he's won minus one.
Yeah,
So,
thank
like,
you.
yes, he is a great driver. So, of course, he has this car under control. It's his car. It's made for him,
Yeah,
with his brain
I should
involved in the
clarify. Not
design.
three officially, four officially, three by our count.
The
Three wins, one gimme.
there you go. And like, of course, that they haven't figured this out yet. If they're that stupid that they can't understand that it's the car that's difficult to drive and not the like once in a twice in a generation driver that's able to figure it out, then they're flawed as a team.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but did you hear? So to get bounce off topic, have you heard the
Thank
rumors
you.
about
Yes,
Russell
that's where I want
and
to go. That's where I wanted to
Okay.
go.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? Give me one reason as to why Russell would want to go into that seat.
Well, if he's losing his seat to Max going to Mercedes, that'd be a reason.
You think that's what you think they're going to choose Max Verstappen over Russell and Mercedes?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I think there's I would say at this point, we're watching Lewis Hamilton driving a Ferrari and Carlos Sainz driving a Williams. Anything's on the fucking table,
Yeah, no shit.
right?
Carlos Sainz and
Like
that Williams is so shocking still.
at this point, I would not be surprised if Mercedes got a little bit like gun shy and wanted the big splash, right? Like remember, there's two different things happening at the same time. One is results on the track, which matter and they're very important. But the more important or secondary piece to it is this entire sport is funded through partnerships and sponsorships. And that is done through having the biggest stars and the biggest brand associated people. And Max Verstappen, without question, is a much bigger star in certain places than George Russell is, right? He is polarizing, yes, but he is a proven champion who you can market in a very specific way. George Russell has not won a championship. George Russell has not come close to winning a championship yet. Let me just put it this way. If there is a conversation to be had about a 4-time, 3-time champion joining your team, you have the conversation. I think that's what's happening at Mercedes. I would also tell you, I guarantee you they had the same conversation last offseason when they were trying to replace Lewis Hamilton and they were told no. And the conversations have just carried on because now Max is a little bit more disgruntled. You don't look a gift horse in the mouth without at least a little, consideration here.
Is that what the saying is?
No, I think I mixed the saying up because I think a gift horse, you're intentionally supposed to not look in the mouth and not investigate. You just take it. I think in this case, Mercedes is doing their due diligence. So it's the opposite of that saying. Regardless, I think Mercedes would be foolish not to at least consider it. Let me put it that way.
I think it's super foolish.
I don't know. I mean, it depends how desperate Mercedes is to get back to the top of the podium.
But do you think Max is going to be the reason they get back up there?
Well, Max
Russell's having a great season.
Yeah, but he hasn't.
Russell's having a fantastic season.
How many races has he won in the last 3 years?
2.
Yeah. How many races has Max won in the last 3 years?
Yeah, but that's because of the car.
Sure, but Mercedes can build him that car.
I mean, I can't just say it's because of the car when I just shit on the fact that the car's the problem. I know someone was listening.
You don't
Tyler, what the fuck are you talking about?
You don't think Mercedes could tune that car to fit Max Verstappen's needs?
I don't know why you'd get rid of, because you're saying that Max has this built-in fan base, but so does George Russell.
It's not Max's. And I know we don't like the guy, but you can't deny the fact that guy is a super global star right now.
Yeah,
he is. He's a 4-time champion on his name. You get that? There's just value in that. Now, I'm not saying Mercedes should do it. Look, I'm still a Mercedes fan at heart, and I think it would be stupid for them to do that. But yeah, I'm not telling you right now that I don't think there's a possibility that they will. I sincerely believe
if you can get the best player,
even if he's a prick,
any sport, you've got to figure out how to do it. Yes, you got to figure out how to do it.
I think, and that's a part of it right now. I also think that.
That being said, that rarely works out. It rarely works out for teams that you go out and get the best player and you give up whatever you've given up.
Sure.
It usually does not work out.
Sure. That's true. That's true. Now, it's worked out in the past for Mercedes because they went to McLaren and they stole Lewis Hamilton and they won 8 championships as a constructor and 7 as a driver. So, or 6 as a driver, because
it would just be so weird to see Verstappen in a Mercedes. Like, would you still be a Mercedes?
Is it any weirder to see Lewis in red?
So that was actually, I had lots of time to think during this race because I didn't know what else to watch. So I was like, just watching it, and I was just like, man, you know what? Hamilton does look good in a red. That yellow helmet of his is so fire that I was like, this is it's perfect. It's a perfect fit for Ferrari and Hamilton right now. And I love seeing him in the Ferrari red. So that to me makes sense.
I think we're newer to this sport. That's the only problem. We're newer to this sport, and as a result, we didn't live through the Mercedes Ferrari fights when it was when Ferrari was Mercedes' biggest rival. We are children of the Red Bull Mercedes rivalries, right?
Yes.
Where Red Bull was the closest challenger. And that's a different conversation. So I think that's why it feels more, how could you cross that Rubicon, right? And it does feel weird still to think that after everything that happened, that Toto Wolff would shake hands with Max Verstappen and welcome him into that garage feels uncomfortable. But we've crossed the Rubicon. Lewis is gone. We're in the next phase. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
who's ready for the heel to babyface turn of Max Verstappen? Like that's what it feels like we're looking at here, because Red Bull in many ways is that evil empire. He leaves that and he gets to write a different narrative very quickly,
Yeah.
potentially. Now, that remains to be seen how that plays out. The flip side of it, as you brought up at the beginning of this, like George Russell going to Red Bull feels just as weird, but there's some logic to it from a Red Bull perspective. It's like, if you're going to lose Max, you better go get a qualified, genuine driver.
1000%.
And the only guy they would go, I think, get other than that would be Lando Norris. But that's not probably going to happen.
Norris and Piastri are both on long-term contracts.
Of course
right now,
they are.
right?
Of course they are. So it's not easy to do, but it doesn't mean it hasn't been done before. And we've seen Red Bull do dumber things before than that too. You could go buy somebody out. Anyway,
I think
it's premature.
I also think that these guys' egos are probably so large that any of them, all of them, including Tsunoda, can believe that they get in that Red Bull car, they're as good as Verstappen.
Sure.
Which is the flaw, because there's been no one but Verstappen other than Ricciardo, who's no longer in the sport. Well, maybe he's a test driver for somebody or
and Tsunoda keeps driving like this. They might go to Ricciardo. They might get that desperate.
I wouldn't be surprised by that.
It.
I wouldn't be surprised by that. Because you can't go to anybody else now. You have to go back to a guy who's already in the car, and you're not going back to Perez. So Ricciardo would make more sense. Sainz stealing from Williams. I don't know if Sainz would go. I think Sainz is a smarter driver than that.
Be.
But he's also having
a chance to win some wins. You got a chance to go win some points. Go restore your legacy as one of the top drivers. Go be the other guy at Red Bull, and all of a sudden fix that problem. There's some ego there, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of players in the world in a lot of different sports who think, oh, I'll be the solution to the Knicks, or I'll be the solution to the Leafs cup drought. Like, I can go and save this franchise or fix this thing. Like, there's guys who drove for Ferrari. I can think of 3 of them right now, all with the intent of, we're going to bring a championship back to Ferrari, right? Hasn't happened since
I love
Schumacher.
That you had to shit on my Leafs, but you didn't mention the Oilers that are in the same position.
Yeah, well, that was no one wanted to play for the Oilers though, for a very long time. At least people wanted to play for the Leafs.
That's true, actually.
The Oilers have won championships in the last 50 years, so it's a little bit different. But yes, no, I mean, I think of
that's the record.
The Leafs, the Cubs, the Knicks. There's a few of those franchises who are long suffering, and people really think that they can go and be the savior there, and it just hasn't worked, right?
Yeah.
Because honestly, truthfully, in all those situations, and I think this is eventually what's going to end up happening for Red Bull, there's no savior coming. You have to develop your star, right? Like, look at Toronto. We want to talk hockey for a second. Look at Toronto. Like, you have a team right now that's built on guys you guys built. You didn't go out and buy, it's not the Yankees who just went and bought everybody else's championships.
You build your stars, you have to build your stars.
And
the team around them.
Their star, Max Verstappen, is homegrown. And the irony of all of it, I think the funniest and weirdest part for me, and we can get off this Red Bull train in a second, but the weirdest part about all of it is that the one thing Red Bull was probably most respected for before they started winning these championships again, between the time that Sebastian Vettel was in there winning the 3 in a row, and then that kind of the Mercedes run where they were kind of stuck behind Mercedes. The one positive thing you could constantly say about Red Bull was that they were developing talent. They had one of the most deep benches. They were always bringing the next guy up, right? And you talked about how well they seemed to be able to scout these drivers all over Europe, how well the Red Bull driving program was. And look at it. The list is impressive, right? You got Sainz, you got Gasly, you've got Albon, you've got how many guys currently on the grid who came through their system, right? And yet they weren't able to convert. No, but he was one of their drivers.
He wasn't. He was one of the. He was not raised in their system.
Oh, I thought he
came over from a different team
to
having success on a different team to go to.
Did he not start with Toro Rosso?
No.
Oh, I apologize. That's my backstory's wrong on that. But my point is the same.
You know what? Yeah. He was with AlphaTauri.
There you go. That's right. So Toro Rosso, then AlphaTauri, now Racing Bulls. That feeder system into Formula One is incredibly impressive. And
why do I think he had a stop in between that?
I don't
but
know.
he did.
But
He
anyway,
didn't.
my point is the same, whether he's in there or not. There is a
Yeah,
very long
correct. It is.
and impressive development thing. And yet there seems to be this gap between all of this amazing talent they have found, cultivated, and brought to the sport, and the ability for any of it to convert at the top level
Yeah.
outside of Max Verstappen. And that is a blemish on that record and legacy. And I think that's a fascinating story. How they were able, like, and who the individual was or is, that when you get to that level, there's a missing piece. And I don't know what it is, but it's fascinating to me. Because obviously, Mercedes and Ferrari, like these other teams have worked hard to develop drivers, but nobody has had the kind of success in the last 20 years as Red Bull has.
No,
Um,
yeah, Gasly and Carlos Sainz were
that's what I mean.
Red Bull junior
That's what I'm
teammates.
saying. That's what I'm saying.
Albon,
Yeah.
Tsunoda,
There's more. There's
Lawson,
guys who aren't even there anymore still. Danny Kvyat.
Albon. Yeah.
Like multiple former drivers. Anyway, the I rest my case. Let's talk about the only other sort of like off track news really quickly, because we've already kind of blown through the race, and then we can
Trying
go
to
through any
think of
notes
what
you
other
have.
race stuff we could talk about. Like
Exactly.
it sucked. It sucked so bad.
Yeah, it did. There's one or two good moments, I would argue. I thought that uh Piastri's pass on Hamilton in the corner after the pit stops was unbelievable. That like
Oh
the
yeah,
high
yeah.
speed
That
corner
going
one, like
off the track into the dirt to
unreal,
overtake
right?
Hamilton. Yeah,
That
that was
was a
great.
phenomenal thing. So there were some
Yes.
highlights from that perspective. The other news though, because it's Saudi Arabia related, is the fact that there seems to be a lot of smoke around the suggestion that the Saudi Arabian monetary fund, who obviously we've had conversations about on this show and many other
Yes.
sports related shows, in terms of their impact in the recent years in terms of financing all kinds of sporting ventures. They seem to be deep in conversations with a certain Lawrence Stroll regarding the purchase of Aston Martin from underneath him, which would be the end of the Stroll family time in Formula One, presumably.
So
but if Lawrence
Aston
Stroll is
Martin
ready to sell, then
really,
his son will not be driving next year if that team is sold. I almost guarantee that.
of course, he won't be driving
Unless he makes it part of the deal. Could you imagine if that was Lawrence
Son has to
Stroll's
drive
like
10 more years,
his,
or anytime he wants
his
to drive,
kicker?
he gets to drive.
His kicker.
They'd
But
say no to that. That'd be a deal
yeah,
breaker.
that would be a very big deal breaker. But yeah, so it sounds like the Saudis want to purchase Aston Martin, and they are strongly considering it. Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of conversation about how we should all feel about that, more importantly, but also just the impact that would have to how that team looks and how that team's run and who'd be driving for that. There's just lots of implications.
Yes.
So that's an interesting storyline that came out of this weekend as well. I don't know if you've got thoughts on that, but
that would be amazing. I think that would. I'm trying to think of how that affects Alonso, because he went to Aston Martin under the guise that that he'll be there for a while as they improve the car, and he must have seen something that was like, okay, they're 2 years away.
right.
Like he must have seen something in their plans that made him
You'd hope
confident
so.
to be there, right? Because that's the only way I can see him being not aggravated at how the team's doing. He
Yeah.
must know something, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder how that would affect him as a driver. Like we know Lance Stroll would be gone, but how does that affect? How would that affect Alonso in the long run? Like, unless that was part of the plan all along, like who knows?
Yeah, we don't know. But anyway, it's interesting because it's the first time I've heard of it. Came up this weekend. There's also reports that Saudi Arabia is building a second Formula One quality circuit, looking to get a second race on the into a future season. Not sure how that will go, or a rotation between Jeddah and this new circuit. Who knows?
So it's kind of, I'm glad we're on this train of thought right now, because we've brought this up a few times with the importance of Saudi Arabia and the countries in that area that are fairly rich countries, and the swearing and rules that have gone with the swearing. And I had a friend of mine, longtime listener, Michael Goldstein, reach out saying, I know you guys have talked about this, but are you also aware of the restrictions that these drivers have been put under to not say anything or do
Me neither.
anything bad to the FIA. Like, you can't talk shit about the FIA. Every sport kind of says you can't talk bad about the referees. You can't do this, you can't do that. You'll get fined, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. But to have, and Max Verstappen brought this up at the end of this race because he wasn't happy with his 5 second penalty, blah, 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 blah. But he also swore, and then he doubled down after the race, being like, well, we can't say anything because we get punished if we say anything. This to me is a massive flaw with every single sport, every single organization. If you cannot tell your bosses, your the people who run the sport, what is wrong with it when you are the driver of it, when you're the athlete of it, you have to be able to maybe not like call them out every day or use offensive language to call them out, but you have to be able to bring attention to things that they are now being handcuffed and being told or silenced. Like, you cannot say these things. So I think that's a massive problem in all sports. I think it's a massive problem in this sport specifically because we've had such controversy with the FIA over the last 5 years. One of the biggest moments in this sport since we've done this, since we've been fans, was the end of Max Verstappen's beginning.
Yeah.
Like the
Beginning of
so
yeah, I got
the
you. The
beginning
end
of
of
the
Hamilton,
end
the
of the
beginning of
sport was the beginning of Max Verstappen. Is so now they're not allowed to bring this up, and it's just funny that Max is the first person to bring it up, considering that when he's the one that's probably benefited the most from it
yeah.
so far in recent history. Now, so no verbal or written language, no gestures or signs, no incitement of violence, obviously, but and now I think about Lewis Hamilton when I bring this next one up is political, religious, or personal statements you are no longer allowed to say unless you get written permission from the FIA to make such statements.
Yep.
Which, if we go back to 2020, 2021, COVID, the Black Lives Movement, everything that was going on in that 1 year period, and one of the most outspoken athletes standing up for people was Lewis Hamilton.
He was.
And he at that moment too he wasn't contemplating leaving the sport, but he saw himself as a more important person outside of the sport than he did driving it each
Correct.
race.
Yeah.
So now they've said you can't do this. Is I'm wondering how long that will last before another thing like COVID, like the Black Lives Movement, like things like that happen before these drivers start saying, no, you can't just silence us when there's important things we need to say.
Well said. I mean, I think you're right. It's a curious conversation. I think that you've already hit on a couple of the what I would suggest are sort of the trigger points to it. Obviously, as we are fully aware, there is a significant amount of money coming in from, how do I put this gently, religiously conservative nations. Let me put it that way.
That's a great way to put it.
Not just, Christian, but multiple different religious nations who have very different views in terms of morality, in terms of behavior unbecoming. And that influence is significant within the FIA, within Formula One as an organization. I mean, the Saudi Arabian Monetary Fund attempted in 2022 to purchase the Formula One brand as a whole, not just a team, the entire thing. There is clearly a huge movement in those countries towards these sports. And it's not just these sports. Obviously, we've seen their impact in golf. We've seen their impact in FIFA.
Soccer.
Yeah. FIFA. But Formula One is a global sport. Those seem to be the most attractive and lucrative for those oil-rich Middle Eastern nations who have expendable money, and they are spending it on these sports. Then I also would argue, I think that is part of it. That is, as you point out, one of the trigger points. Equally, though, I think there is also a connection that can be made between that and sort of the bigger geopolitical climate we're living in terms of, let's call it like a pendulum swing back towards more conservative values, and the idea that there are a lot of the nations that these races take place in that have recently elected right wing and more conservative political leaders. I think that that's an impact in it. I think in general there is some skittishness around sport leadership, and certainly the FAA, I think, is not immune to that in terms of trying to avoid controversy, trying to avoid the kinds of issues like you brought up because they consider them to be polarizing, and they would rather not sort of step out on that limb, and instead they would rather swing more towards a censored, protected perspective on what those things are. I mean, they've done away with the opportunity for drivers to make political statements prior to the anthems, which they had since COVID. That only lasted a few seasons and then disappeared. Obviously, we used to see the players take knees and sort of have a moment to wear, different causes on their shirt. I think of Max Verstappen in the early days being there to support other people. I think of Vettel, more importantly, having like climate change messages. It wasn't just racism. It wasn't just, those things. It was all kinds of different political messages. That's all gone from it. I'm not saying that it needs to be there. I'm not saying that I want it to be there. I'm simply saying that it's interesting how quickly we moved away from it. I'm of the mind.
It's very, very interesting how quickly.
And it's clearly a decision. Like, it is not by accident. Let me put it that way.
Oh no, it was definitely made, but I don't know. We can get into a whole political thing right now. I'm not going to do that. But like, if you're listening to Sebastian Vettel in a conversation and you don't like the shirt he's wearing because he's saying something that is a cause he believes in, and it's not an offensive cause, it's just a cause he believes in. And if you're mad at that, that's a more of a look inwards to yourself
100%.
Situation, and then it is a be mad at him for supporting something he believes in. Now, the red line there is like, when does it become too far? Like, when is it someone choosing like one country on the side of a war over another one? Because like there's different scenarios where everyone's kind of chose Ukraine because Russia was very much a bully in that situation. It's still ongoing, but you have other situations where it's like it's very much more history along things, and so like I can see why they'd want to get away from it, but at some point it's going to nip them in the butt. And if you are stopping the main athletes, the people that we look at every day in a helmet and then out of a helmet before and after with interviews, you start silencing them, we start caring less about sticking around after a race.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay, in my opinion, to have drivers who want to express themselves and drivers who don't. It does not need to be a blanket. That's how it's going to work. And it's no different. Like, I don't agree necessarily that, for example, and I am going to get political for a second, but I don't necessarily agree that it was necessary for the NHL to state that they were going to stop using pride jerseys because they had a small but vocal minority of players who were upset about it, and some teams who ended up just choosing not to do it to make sure that those players felt comfortable. But they made that decision, but they didn't then punish players who independently chose to have pride tape or put other causes on, there are regulations about what they can do in the game. They're not writing messages on their skates and things, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, if it was a one-off or two-off situation where you had some players who really wanted to make a statement. I don't think the NHL would be coming down in quite such a totalitarian way as we are seeing in Formula One, where they are very, very conscious of everybody being uniform within these guidelines. And I think that's where we get into this becoming an issue. You have a couple squeaky wheels, you have a couple loud advocates for things. I don't think that's a problem. You're going to have, it feels, and again, as I said, it reeks of this need for control that this organization clearly has, that now is getting to the point where it's like, this is the kind of thing this organization should be doing with such a gentle hand that it's never seen, but it's so blatantly seen that now it's the story, and they've made it worse for themselves. Strictly like PR wise, you don't make yourself the story, and they've done that 1,000 times. But that's Formula One. How is that different than any of these situations we've talked about? Right? That seems to be very much in the DNA of Formula One. They are very poor self advocates.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of nailed it. Like, every sport has a uniform code. So
Correct.
if you want, like, same with the NFL, same with NHL, like, you have to have your uniform up to this standard. You can't go off book. So that's a very easy and very political way to say, wear this, don't go outside of it. Whereas the FIA, in the rule book now, and like from messages that we're able to see that are given to drivers, it's the exact opposite. It's like, don't embarrass us. It has nothing to do with a uniform code. It just don't embarrass us for whatever reason. But you know what? If there's no one holding you accountable, how are you going to make sure that you're doing your best job? Because you're here to support the sport. You're not here to just run it with like a iron fist. You were here to grow the sport and keep it within a controlled environment.
Well, and on that though, one of the ironies of all of this is that their most successful fan growing exercise, probably in any sport, we've talked about 1,000 times, in Drive to Survive, is an uncensored, incredibly profane final product, right? The entire first season is literally just Gunter Steiner, swearing, cursing, calling it his team a wanker. Like there's all this kind of like, but it was entertaining. It was engaging. People thought it was way more raw and real because they were listening to these athletes frustrated and angry and having fun and whatever else. Whenever this kind of,
It was
honest, that's what I mean. The honest capturing of that part of it is what made it work. I would be curious. I wasn't thinking about it when I watched the most recent season, but I bet you it's a lot cleaner than it used to be if I watched it back. I'll bet you Formula One has had even Netflix clean it up.
Even the drama is less
that too, but
problematic and less
sure
like dramatic. Really, it's forced, it's fake.
Yeah.
Whereas before, you saw real interviews, you saw real arguments that happened, and then it just became more of a we need to go this way or we need to go that way. So,
but again, I don't think it's changing anytime soon because again, you as you've already pointed out, we're leaning more and more towards this is where the money is coming from. And I'm going to tell you something else. As someone who works in sports, unfortunately, sometimes the first decision makers at the table are the ones who have the money, right? There are so many situations that you are forced to make decisions that might not be the first decision you would make, but it's the decision that is going to guarantee that the money you need to do what you want and need to do as an organization is there. And at the end of the day, that makes the world go round. And it's not always fair and it's not always right, but it is how it works.
The only thing stronger than moving a needle, the only thing stronger than the wind moving a needle is money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it was better than my horse's mouth reference.
Yeah, I made that up on the spot too.
Oh, I thought you were quoting some kind of like Oh, that's well done for you. What are you doing podcasts? You should be spitting verses.
Well, I think it's kind of the same media,
I suppose. All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts on Jeddah, or can we finally hand out some hardware?
I have one final thought. I'm glad it's over. That's it.
All right.
It was so boring.
All right. So is it our new front runner for worst race of the year?
Oh yeah.
All right. All right. Let's hand out some hardware then real quick here. Who do you have as driver of the day?
Lando Norris.
I agree. Coming up from 10th, finishing what, 4th?
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Great race for him.
And also saved the point gap that would have immediately if he was first, if Piastri was first and he was 10th or 9th or 8th. That's a almost not so driver of the day.
Correct. Well, speaking of, who do you have as your not so driver of the day?
Yuki Tsunoda and that piece of shit that took out my guy Gasly.
All right, we'll leave it with that one. I'm not going to dig in on it.
Who do you have? Was it Tsunoda or just?
Oh, I had Gasly for driving into Tsunoda. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh,
I'm just kidding. I had Tsunoda as well. I just thought I'd, okay, so I think we've already talked about our overtake. Would you agree it was the Piastri move?
I do want to give it was 1,000% Piastri going into the dirt in the hot corner overtake on Hamilton. I will say honorable mention to Hamilton braking, letting Norris pass him at the apex of a corner, just so that he knew, or just because he knew he got DRS on that next straight to overtake and keep the place back up. Well, no, he kept it for 2 more laps, but very clever. But Norris caught on to it the next time they went right into that corner and said, "What? I'm not doing this again." So
100%.
That was fun to watch on for the 5 minutes that it existed.
Yeah. Did you have a radio call of the race?
I do, because I have a new word that came from this, and I've never heard this word before. Well, I've heard it, but I never seen anyone spell it out before. So it was Alonso when. Do you remember when Bortoleto went into the corner and in the braking zone went wide and almost forced Alonso into the wall, and Alonso got the skin of his teeth, or is that or skin of the hair on his chin? By the hair on his chin, the skin of his teeth. Hair on his chin, I can understand. I don't know what the skin of his teeth is. I don't know what I don't know what. Anyways, I'm digressing. He
Yeah, a little
said,
bit.
"Oh, that was close, so close. Check the car. He was moving and braking. That was so close. Whoa!" And
But whoa.
they typed out BWOAH. They typed it out. Whoa, whoa. And I've so
Do
there's a
you
new word of the
think,
day with
okay, do you
radio
think though
color.
that those radio call messages we're seeing are typed or are they automated? Like, is it
Automated,
voice to text now?
automated for
In the
sure.
olden days, though, there was probably some teletype guy just
Probably, and they are delayed, so
maybe.
like it could be tightened up because again they take out a lot of the swearing.
Speaking of that, did you hear the other there was a suggestion that Max actually didn't swear on that radio call, but they beeped it anyway. Did you
I
hear
heard
that
about it. Yeah,
little
I heard about
conspiracy
that. Yeah,
theory?
I heard
Now I
about
think
that.
we're getting out there because I'm pretty sure Max just said fuck it.
Of course he did. When that's the thing is when you're mad, like that's the word that's coming out of your mouth, and if you just held it in, you're not concentrating on driving. You get it out, it's out of the way.
Yeah.
Fine them $10,000.
Okay, let's just get right to it. We're going to Miami, Tyler. Tell us about it.
Welcome to Miami. Viva las Miami. We're going to Miami. 5.4 kilometer circuit, 57 laps, 19 turns, 3 DRS zones. That first DRS zone is between turns 9 and 11. The second DRS zone is on the longest straight after turn 16. Then the third begins on the last turn, turn 19, of the track through the start finish line. Top speeds over 340 kilometers an hour. This is a street race. Also, if you guys hadn't gone back and listened to our all of our podcasts last year, this was one of our favorite races of the year last year.
After having been one of the duds of all duds the
It was
year
one of the
before.
duds of all duds in its inaugural year, and I think this is its fourth year now.
I
Third year,
think so.
fourth year.
Three or four, yeah.
Yeah, last year this was one of our favorite races. I think Lando Norris
First
took
Grand
it, if
Prix
I'm
was
not wrong.
2022. So what is that? 23, 22, 23, 24. This will be 4. We're at 4.
Or 4. Yeah. So I think the last 2 years have been good here. So fingers crossed, we have a very exciting race. It's not this weekend, it's a weekend away.
Correct.
Is this a
and
sprint
it's a
race?
sprint race. Yes, it is
Yes.
a sprint race. So practice on May 2nd, sprint qualifying, pardon me, May 2nd, and then sprint and quali on the 3rd, and then race on the 4th. And again, to Miami, this is a mid-afternoon race on the Pacific Coast. So 1 p.m., 1:30 sprint qualifying, 9 a.m. sprint on the Saturday, 1 p.m. qualifying, and then the 1 p.m. race on Sunday. McLaren won this race. As you said, this is where their season began to turn around last year. And it'll be interesting to see if they find the same success or if they are able to, or if anybody else perhaps uses this as a springboard into the next set of races here in this season. Tyler, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend. And until after May 4th.
Pit Stop Podcast is a presentation of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. Thanks for listening. The Ordinary Podcasting Network wishes to acknowledge that the lands on which our conversations take place include Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting ground and home for many indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and the Nakota Sioux peoples, as well as the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. And we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live, create, and share stories on these territories.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network intends to engage in conversations and dialogue which acknowledge that reconciliation is not a destination, but a journey, and that we remain committed to practicing our craft in a decolonized space.